Since you have passed away without a valid will in place, Intestate Succession Act will kick in. Intestate Succession Act will, the assets that you are passing to your beneficiaries that you have nominated on a will can also be excluded from their marriage regime. That means if Welcome to BluFinance TV. My name is Ayanda. In this episode, you will learn why you need to have a valid will. As a person who has been accumulating assets over the years, you want your assets to be passed to your family once you have passed away. And for this to happen in a meaningful way, you will need to have a valid will in place. Without a valid will in place, your family will have no idea of how your assets are going to be distributed amongst your family. And also your family will have no idea of how you want your dead body to be treated once you have passed away. In this episode, we look at a person who have died without a will and also a person who have died with a will. Now, let us assume that you have passed away without a valid will. Your family will definitely struggle because they will have to run around, get all the required information for the Master of High Court to decide if your family will need a letter of authority or a letter of executorship for your assets to be distributed. For these letters, it will depend on the market value of your deceased estate at the time of death for the Master of High Court to decide if they are going to give your family a letter of authority or a letter of executorship. If your assets are worth 250,000 and below, your family will need a letter of authority for them to distribute your wealth amongst them. But if your assets are worth above 250,000, in that case, the Master of High Court will issue a letter of executorship. With that letter of executorship, your family will need to consult a legal person to assist them to draft instructions on how your estate is going to be distributed amongst the family. And that letter of authority, since you have passed away without a valid will in place, Intestate Succession Act will kick in. Intestate Succession Act will guide your executors on how your assets are going to be distributed amongst the family members. Let us assume that you are married in community of property and you have 3 children. In this case, before the actual distribution of your deceased estate, your spouse will get their 50% of the entire estate. And then your 50% is going to be distributed according to the guideline of the Intestate Succession Act. According to the Act, the spouse will get the greater of 250,000 or the share of children. Let us assume that we have left behind 400,000 of estate and we are survived by the spouse and 3 children. In this case, 100,000 is going to be a share of children, and according to the law, the spouse will get the greater of 250,000 or the share of children. That means in this case, the spouse will get 250,000 and then children will have 150,000 to divide amongst them. Each child will get at least 50,000 rand. If your estate maybe was about 2 million, each and every one of them was going to get at least 500,000 per person, because 500,000 for the spouse, it is greater than 250,000. Now let us look at a different scenario. In this scenario, you've passed away with a valid will in place. A will is a legal document where you can mention your last wishes, from how you want your remains to be treated. Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Do you want your organs to be donated by your family? And also on your will, it is the only document that allows you to actually brag about the assets that you have in place. And also on your will, you can mention the liability that you have, so that the executors are not going to struggle to find people who you owe money. On your will, you can specifically mention you will be getting what from your deceased estate. It could be physical asset, it could be cash. You may also use percentages to distribute your wealth amongst your beneficiaries. And when you have passed away, these assets are going to be passed to your beneficiaries. If some of your beneficiaries happen to be minor children, and then you have to mention on your will that testamentary trust must be created when you have passed away if these beneficiaries, they are still minor children. But if they are not, the testamentary trust is not going to be created. If they are still minor children, this trust will exist up until the last beneficiary has reached a certain age that you have specifically mentioned on your will. You will also have to nominate, and a guardian will be taking care of these minor children. On your will, you will nominate executors, and executors are responsible for the distribution of your estate. They will make sure that minimum legal requirements are met before they distribute your estate. and they will make sure that all debts that you have are paid before they distribute assets amongst beneficiaries, and they will make sure that each and every asset that you have which has been mentioned on your will and those are not mentioned on your will, they are collected and distributed to your beneficiaries. The assets that you are passing to your beneficiaries that you have nominated on your will can also be excluded from their marriage regime. That means if they are married in community of property or ANC with accruals, when they are getting a divorce, these assets are not going to form part of their assets as a couple. In conclusion, I can say that a will is a must for your family. If you don't have a will, your family is going to struggle. But if you do have a will, your family is not going to struggle because executors are going to take care of it. Thank you for being with me until now. Let us meet again in our next video.